Hello everyone, I hope that you are all doing good and fine and you're staying home. So for the methods that we did take care of, we went for communicative language teaching and eclectic approach. And we are going to start with communicative language teaching, or CLT for short. So before starting, I would like to highlight two questions, and I want you guys to bear them in mind while following the slides of this method. So the first one is, what does communicative approach say learners need to achieve communicative competence? And which activities create purposeful communication for CLT, and how can this help students learn? Starting from the origins of this method, CLT could be said to be the product of educators and linguists who had grown dissatisfied with the audiolingual and grammar translation method. They saw the need to focus on language teaching and on communicative proficiency rather than on mere mastery of structures. They felt that students were not learning enough realistic language. So students at that time did not know how to communicate using appropriate social languages, using the methods such as audiolingual and grammar translation method. So for all these reasons, CLT was born and appeared. So what do we mean by communicative language teaching approach? CLT is a learner-centered approach to language teaching that emphasizes the importance of all four language skills and aims to achieve communicative competence rather than linguistic competence through considerable learner interaction and communication of real meaning. It is an approach that tends to promote the functional over the structural, which means that this method emphasizes in notional functional concepts and in communicative competence rather than in grammatical structures by making the language relevant to the world rather than just the classroom. So, what are the principles of communicative language teaching approach? Authentic and meaningful communication should be the goal of classroom activities. Fluency is an important dimension of communication. As I said before, this method focuses on fluency over accuracy. Communication involves the integration of different language skills, meaning the development of the four macro skills: speaking, listening, reading, and writing, and how they are integrated in a meaningful communication. The topics are selected and graded regarding age, needs, level, and students' interest. Motivation is central. Teachers here should raise students' interest from the beginning of the lesson. Communicative activities are essential, so the activities should be presented in a situation or context and have a communicative purpose, and we will see some typical activities of this approach in the following slides. For the main features and techniques of communicative language teaching approach, contextualization is a basic premise. So when teachers using this approach and want to present a grammar topic, for example, present continuous, the teacher here will not just mime the action of walking and ask, what am I doing? Am I walking? Instead, the teacher will show, for example, a picture of her last trip and tell the students something like, I have pictures of my vacation. Look, in this picture, I am with my friends. We are having lunch at a very expensive restaurant. In the other picture, we are swimming at the beach. So, like that, the grammar topic should be put in a meaningful communication for the students to understand. Language learning is learning to communicate, and effective communication is sought. So when learners are involved in real communication, their natural strategies for language acquisition will be used, and this will allow them to learn to use the language smoothly and effectively. Communicative competence is the desired goal. Students are expected to interact with other people, either in pair work, group work, and so on. Teachers help learners in any way that motivates them to work with the language. Now, for CLT in action, as we said before, that CLT, the focus of this method is on the language and the contextualization of this language. So the communicative language teaching approach says that learners need the knowledge of the language plus the how to use this language or how to put it in a context to achieve the language competence, as the meaning is of primary importance in CLT and contextualization is a basic principle of the method. So communicative language teaching is based on idea that learners best learn language when they are actively using it meaningfully, as the approach believes that learners benefit most from activities that provide meaningful communication. Now, look at these two pictures. Which one shows learners involved in communication? Both of them show a teacher and students. And obviously, picture 2 shows learners involved in communication, as CLT gives the teachers many roles which move them away from the traditional approaches of teaching, as it is shown in picture number 2, where teachers just keep lecturing to the students without giving them any chance to communicate. For the teachers and learners roles, the teacher in ICT is a facilitator, meaning facilitates students' communication, which is done through careful selection of material and activities relevant to the aims of the lesson. The teacher too is an assister, as language teachers need to assist learners by providing them with frameworks, patterns, and rules to develop their communicative language skills. A teacher too is a guide and motivator, motivating students to learn, a resource of knowledge, organizer, organizing activities, and counselor. So from these rules, we can understand that the teacher's job is to get their students to communicate using real language by providing them with instruction, practice, and above all, opportunities to produce English in activities which encourage acquisition and fluency of the language. For the learner's role, the learner in CLT is a negotiator between his own learning processes, between the interactions with his classmates, and between the activities that are developed inside the classroom, which means that learners should contribute as much as they gain in the classroom in an interdependent way learning. Now, the advantages of this method: CLT can increase the fluency of the target language. This enables the learners to be more confident when interacting with other people, and they also enjoy talking more. Communicative approach is much more pupil-oriented because it is based on pupils' needs and interests. CLT seeks to personalize and localize language and adapt it to the interests of pupils. Meaningful language is always more easily retained by learners. It seeks to use authentic resources, which is more interesting and motivating for learners. Children acquire grammar rules as a necessity to speak, so it is more efficient and proficient. Now, I'll leave the screen to Nora.
Thank you, Fatima Zahra. Now, what are the activities of CLT? We have role play, which is an oral activity usually done in pairs whose main goal is to develop student communicative abilities in a certain setting. TVUs is an oral activity usually done in pairs whose main goal is to develop students' communicative abilities in a certain setting. Also, interactive language games, as students find games enjoyable and give them valuable communicative practice. Opinion sharing is content-based activity whose purpose is to engage students' conversational skill while talking about something they care about. Also, discussion, group work is a collaborative activity whose purpose is to foster communication. Information gap is a collaborative activity whose purpose is for students to effectively obtain information. Model examples of role play. Teachers set the scene, example in a restaurant, bank, park, define the goal of students' conversation, ordering, asking for direction, talking about a book they recently read. Opinion sharing. The instructor introduces a topic and asks students to contemplate their opinions about it. Topic examples: dating, school dress, codes, global warming. The students talk in pairs or small groups as discussion, debating their opinions on the topic. So now, what does communicative approach say learners need to achieve communicative competence? The communicative approach says learners need language knowledge and knowledge of how to use language to achieve communicative competence. Which activities create purposeful communication for CLT? How can this help students learn? Meaningful communication or meaningful communicative activities are the best to serve CLT. This can help students learn because it's learner-centered and has a real-life purpose, and learners best learn language when they actively use it. So now, the eclectic approach and how it relates to language teaching. What is the eclectic approach? What are the main characteristics? What are the advantages and limitations of this approach? First, eclectic. What does this word mean? Eclectic that is made up of various sources or styles. For example, the restaurant menu was eclectic and included food from a number of ethnic groups and cultures. Another example, in Jane's library, you will find an eclectic mix of books. She reads just about anything. So let's move to the definition. Eclecticism is defined as a type of methodology that makes use of the different language learning approaches instead of sticking to one standard approach. Eclecticism seeks the balanced development of all four skills at all stages, while emphasizing the early development of oral skills. An eclectic teacher has to be imaginative, energetic, and willing to experiment for the purpose of keeping lesson varied and interesting. So from these definitions, we conclude that eclectic method is a combination of different methods of teaching and learning approaches. Teachers will be successful in teaching if they implement this approach. EA makes teaching innovative and enjoyable. The learner participates in a lesson actively and interacts with the teachers and other students. Eclectic brings capabilities among the students, caters for individual needs. So, the eclectic approach is the one that integrates all the language teaching methods depending on the classroom circumstances and the abilities of the learner. So this approach permits the teacher to select what works well in their classroom. So eclectic approach is a useful one in teaching language in a comprehensive way, because as I say, all method approaches or techniques which are suitable to the classroom environment are included. For instance, grammar translation method, which means students learn grammatical rules and apply those rules by translating target language into native language. Direct method, teacher avoid using native language. Target language is directly used. 4 skills are involved. Structural situational approach. Teacher teach language through a careful selection, graduation, and gradation and presentation of vocabulary item, and structure through situation-based approach. Audiolingual or audiovisual method. Students are taught through reinforcement. New words, grammar directly taught without using native language. Drill and practice are involved. Bilingual method, using 2 languages. Communicative language teaching, emphasize on oral method of teaching. Develop communication competence. Total physical response or TPR, teaching a second language based on listening, linked to physical activities which are designed to reinforce comprehension. The silent way, the teacher speaks very little when using this method, and students work as independent language learners. So now I will give the word to my friend Sarah to complete other parts of this presentation.
Moving on to look at some of the main characteristics and salient features of this approach, starting by talking about how flexible and adaptable it is. Since, unlike the other approaches, this approach basically combines and incorporates all the various existing methods, approaches, techniques in ELT, taking the advantages of each method and giving the teacher the chance to explore and exploit different approaches depending on the classroom circumstances and also the students' or learners' needs and abilities, which makes like the teaching innovative and enjoyable. The learner objectives are easily achieved. It also breaks the boredom. This diversity breaks the boredom of the lesson, which will cause the learner to participate in a lesson actively and interact with the teacher and each other. EAS, it also supports the natural order of learning, first listening, followed by speech, and then reading, and then writing. And the activities and resources are basically limitless in this approach. You can choose whatever you like and use it in a certain lesson, but it should be adapted to use the English in natural context, which means those activities basically should be related to the real life situations. It should enable the students to actually talk and communicate the language with fluency and accuracy, of course. So the teacher proposes a variety of exercises, both written and oral, in order to improve the learner's communicative abilities and with accuracy and fluency.
This approach has a lot of advantages, but we're going to go through some of the main ones. First of all, it facilitates the achievement of objectives. Eclectic approach creates a good learning environment in which student-student relationship is improved through interaction that's happening in the classroom and also like the relationship with the teacher. It also has like the potential of keeping the language teachers open to alternatives, since it gives a lot of options to different alternatives to choose from. It blends the practice of listening, speaking, reading, writing into an organic whole, which means it basically integrates the four skills and focuses on developing or enhancing. The teaching learning process becomes easier and more rewarding, consequently, of course. The EA ensures constant reflection and renewal of the teacher, because he is always searching and seeking for new ways and various ways to deliver a certain lesson using different methods and approaches, which going to lead reflection about whether or not the approaches or the methods involved have given the adequate results, or did it work or not. Okay, now let's look at the role of the teacher in the classroom. He is basically a facilitator and a guider that provides the support needed in order for to the learners. And he should be creative. He provides a lot of different activities, and also create the suitable environment for the interaction, which going to leave the learners active and attentive, focusing on the learning process, and they're actually having a clear vision on what they are actually learning. Learners also interact between each other, since the teacher creates the adequate environment for that. Now, though this approach might seem as a perfect approach, but it still has like some limitations and drawbacks. First of all, it distracts the teacher from reflecting on their teaching. Now, what this means is this process of choosing or selecting the adequate approaches might potentially become mechanic, which means the teacher is going to choose this method, for example, and it worked with a certain class, so he's going to choose it over and over again, which going to stop him from reflecting whether or not that approach or those approaches worked or not, and methods and techniques, of course. It also it's been criticized heavily because it doesn't give a guidance regarding the principles by which various methods and techniques can be opted and used, since it puts the pressure on the teacher um, in terms of selecting which approach, which technique is suitable for this class or that class. So, and even if he managed to decide, it still creates the uncertainty in the teachers. So it makes it difficult for the teacher to select the appropriate aspects for a specific session, which generates uncertainty in teachers, as I mentioned before. Also, the reliance upon one single theory of teaching and eclecticism results in students' inability to learn, because the weaknesses of single theory based methods. As I mentioned before, this approach can, or the process of selecting the approaches can be mechanic, and if the teacher have found like that a certain approach works best for this class, it can lead for him to actually use it all of the time, um, which will have a negative effect on the students learning, basically. And this approach, of course, as I mentioned before, has a lot of different activities that you can use, limitless types of activities. Some of these activities, for example, are role play, fill in the blanks, interviews, discussion, and so on and so forth. Thank you for listening. Hope you're all safe and have a nice day.